Inside the Illini, Big Ten College Football is brought to you by your local Anheuser-Busch distributors. Ray Eldridge Jewelry, elegance without the attitude. Peoria and Decatur. Physician's Choice Wellness. Give your weight away today. And Buffalo Wild Wings. Mattoon, Champaign, Savoy.
Welcome to Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football, the show that each week takes you inside the games, the practices, and the interview rooms as we get ready for the upcoming Fighting Illini game. I'm Matt Lovelace coming to you from Buffalo Wild Wings in Savoy, as we do every week as the Illini get ready for the Michigan Wolverines. A tough game coming up, the second tough road test in a row. Now, as always, we defer most of the expertise to our panel. Steve Kelly, Brian Barnhart, and Bob Osmussen. They're going to take a look at some of the big college football games we'll talk about last week. We'll talk about some of the big topics across college football and get a real close look at the Wolverines over the next hour. But first, we'll head over to our panel. Guys.
Thanks, Matt. You know, one of the big stories in the Big Ten, at least, I think, occurred Saturday night in Columbus, Ohio State and Nebraska. I think most people thought that would be a very close game, and it was for a while, but I remember getting off the plane coming back from Madison, checking the halftime score, and what is going on here? Got home in time to see some of the second half. What a great football game.
Well, somebody pointed out it was a Big Ten game and a Big 12 game broke out or something like that. That's, of course, Nebraska used to be in the Big 12, but very high scoring, and Ohio State just really pulled away in the second half.
Urban Meyer is taking this we want to finish undefeated thing very seriously, and he's got his team playing great, and they really steamrolled Nebraska. You got to be impressed with Braxton Miller, who is in the Heisman picture now. Geno Smith is kind of the clear-cut favorite in my mind right now, but Braxton Miller is doing everything. Great runner, great thrower, and a leader, and he's a sophomore. They're going to win a national title very early in Urban Meyer's career, I'm afraid.
We'll talk more about this as we move along the show, but Illinois went to Madison, played pretty good for 3 quarters. It was a 10-7 game, and then Wisconsin scored 3 times in the fourth. Illinois ran out of gas, but maybe something to build on there.
Well, something to build on. I thought the first quarter, especially, they came out with a lot of emotion. It was a 0-0 game. When they took the lead, when Steve Hall picked off that pass, I mean, they just mobbed him on the sideline. That was something that I think people had noticed. They weren't really emotional on the sideline, and they had that players-only meeting. The seniors kind of led it with Buchanan and Hawthorne, and I think they responded to that. Just in the fourth quarter, they just ran out of gas.
Defensive breakdowns again hurt them. The touchdown that Wisconsin got to tie it really was critical, because I think if Illinois makes a stop there, I really thought if they get a 14-0 lead, they'll be in good shape, but it just never happened. They were never able to get that double-digit lead, so Wisconsin was able to come back and then the shank Bud. Just that kind of stuff, as I've continued to point out, happens every week to this team at the absolute worst time. When they have some momentum, they're doing okay, and then the ball goes 10 yards off the punter's foot. And it just doesn't make any sense.
Terry Hawthorne went down in that ball game. His status for today's game still kind of up in the air. We'll have to see how that comes out. He was actually, he was not just knocked out of the game, he was knocked out. And so he didn't practice much this week. So it'll be a game time decision, I'm sure, on him on whether or not he plays. We're off and rolling on this edition of the show. Matt, we'll throw it back to you at this time.
Hey, thanks, guys. Coming up, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that Wisconsin game and show you why, despite some similar results, the Illini actually looked like a much better team, especially on defense for most of that game. That's next on Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football. Welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football here at Buffalo Wild Wings in Savoy. Now, for the second year in a row, the Illini seem to play an inspired first half of football against what really was a good Wisconsin team. But for the second year in a row, it didn't put one in the win column. We go on the road to Madison with our Central Illinois GMC dealers and our look in the rear view.
Madison, Wisconsin, home of the 2-time defending Big Ten champs. A crowd of 80,000 piled into Camp Ramble to watch a team that, despite their great recent history, struggled to a 3-2 record coming in. Even with a hostile crowd with only a smattering of blue and orange, the Illini defense that had undergone so much scrutiny came out inspired. Early in the game, forcing the mistakes for a change. Major pressure on Wisconsin QB Joel Stavy, and he's picked off Steve Hull, returning it to the Illinois 28.
I was able to be in the right place at the right time.
Just a few plays later, Nathan Scheelhaus back to his old self, scoring with his feet, just across the goal line for a 5-yard score, part of an 84-yard rushing day for him, and it put the Illini up by 7.
I thought that, Nathan was back to himself and playing at 100%.
I thought we did a good job on offense, picking up the blitzes that they were sending.
But later in the second, the Illini fall victim to the turnover. Shieldhouse picked off. The Badgers return the favor. Stavi dumping off to James White. White took over with his legs.
And he's in the open field, right down the sideline.
62 yards went the screen, and the game was tied at the half. The Illini were just fine with that.
I think at times in the first half, there were some things that might not have occurred our way that we wanted it to occur, but we stepped up and kept on performing.
We just talked about, playing every snap and not beating ourselves. That's one of the things, we came out on fire.
Neither offense came out of the break firing. Wisconsin's Kyle French knocked in a 46-yard field goal, making it 10-7 going into the final quarter. And for those that know the ending, it's hard to believe it was that close, that late. In the fourth, Wisconsin rode the home crowd energy to a quick score. A 9-yard run from Monte Ball, making it a 10-point game. On their next drive, one that took just 9 seconds, Stavi airing it out to Jared Abradaris, part of his third straight 100-yard receiving game, a 59-yard strike. It was 24-7.
In the second half, they kind of got some momentum off of, a couple big plays.
Then minutes later, the Illini put together their best series of the game. A 13-play, 75-yard drive, ending with a Shieldhouse to Ryan Langford touchdown connection. But the 10-point deficit quickly became 17 again. Despite a slow first half, Ball ended up with 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. This was his second, and it capped all scoring. A 31-14 Wisconsin win. And what felt like a much better performance by the Illini, the results remained the same, both encouraging and troubling for Illinois after the game.
We have to learn how to respond, and to respond in a positive way instead of a negative way and letting things snowball on us.
I think that, some things happened and we didn't bounce back or respond the way that we should have.
Well, the Illini play well for 3 quarters up at Camp Randall Stadium against the Badgers, but guys, in that fourth quarter, Wisconsin, as we mentioned earlier, kind of took over. Monte Ball did not do a lot in the first 3 quarters, but that big offensive line for Wisconsin eventually just kind of took the wind out of Illinois' sails. And Illinois, as you mentioned earlier, Bob, kind of hurt themselves. That punt, I think, and people forget there's a lot of key plays in a game, but that was a chance to pin Wisconsin deep and maybe help your defense out, and it didn't work out.
This was a very winnable game for Illinois. Extremely winnable. You mentioned Monte Ball did not play like Monte Ball of the past. He got some touchdowns. He did his late work, but they are just not the same Wisconsin team. They're going to end up probably representing the leaders in the Big Ten title game, but boy, is that going to be a really, really soft deal, especially when you got Ohio State sitting there probably 12-0 or 11-1. So I'm very disappointed in the way Wisconsin's playing. Illinois had a chance and just let it get away.
Monte Ball did end up with 116 yards rushing. Again, he's not been playing all that well this season. He had those scores late. They put up 21 points in the fourth quarter to put it away. When you look just at the score, you think, well, it was a blowout, but it was a much better game than that throughout.
Well, now that he's healthy, Nathan Shieldhouse for Illinois, 178 yards passing, 84 yards rushing, moving very well. But it's apparent, and I think Coach Beckman has talked about this, 1, the offensive line's got to protect him, and 2, he's got to have some help. I mean, if you can't protect him, you can't run the ball, you're asking Nathan Shieldhouse to do a lot for you.
I thought he played well, but he had no help. He had guys dropping passes. He just had guys not getting open. The line wasn't protecting. Nathan's got to have a little time, but I think he's so much better when he's able to run like he was on Saturday. I just got to let him get out there, do his thing. He'll be fine. I think he has a chance to have a great game against Michigan on Saturday because of all those things he's able to do with his arms and with his legs.
I think it was good news that he got 84 yards rushing. The bad news is the team only had 106. So that means you're getting nothing out of Josh Ferguson and Donovan Young. That needs to change sometime soon.
Plus, he carried it 22 times for the day, so that was certainly a lot. Darius Malines was back. First time in a while for Darius as he returned and caught 5 catches.
And that's good, but where's John Davis? That's what I continue to wonder. Where is John Davis? John Davis, I thought, was going to have a monster season, and he just hasn't been made available. I don't know what's going on. I guess a lot is going on in practice, we don't know. But I think they need to get more people involved beyond Darius, beyond Ryan Langford. Beyond Spencer Harris is playing well, but they need those tight ends out there doing some stuff.
And the tight end is probably the deepest position on the team,
Oh, yeah.
and one that really has not been hit very hard by injury, so it would make sense to get those guys more in the mix.
On defense, Jonathan Brown was back for Illinois, had a nice game, 9 tackles against Wisconsin. Steve Hall had the interception. Good to see him back as well, but Shubosani was not out there. And then, of course, Terry Hawthorne with the big hit. I know when we first saw it, it didn't look like an illegal hit. I don't think it really was, but it was a hard hit, knocked him out of the game. Certainly a scary moment for Illini fans.
Very scary. Scary for Terry and his family and his friends. And I watched that, and now you're just sitting there going, please get up, or please. And the good thing is, put the thumbs up. You knew he was okay, but boy, that's just a frightening experience. And you just feel for those guys. And we realize how precious that football moment is.
Yeah, it really is, and it can end suddenly, so we're so glad that Terry's going to be okay in the long run. All right, we'll find out more. We'll talk some more about the different divisions and all that straight ahead, but for now, let's go back to Matt.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Yeah, over the next couple of segments, we'll talk about some of the issues the Big Ten has. A very dubious distinction this week when it comes to the national rankings. We'll discuss next on Inside the Illini, Big Ten College Football.
The Inside the Illini Weekly MVP is brought to you by Shields, Gear, Passion, Sports. It's the most valuable Illini player from each week's game. It's been a long time coming for their quarterback. Nathan Shieldhouse was as mobile as he's been all season. Finally back to full speed coming off his ankle injury. He led Illinois' rushing attack with 108 net yards. After taking a few sacks, he racked up 84 on the stat sheet, and he punched in the first score of the game and moved into 8th in the Big Ten among active rushing yardage leaders.
Hey, welcome back to Inside the Illini, Big Ten College Football. Now, Big Ten fans don't need to be reminded it hasn't been a banner year for the conference. Insult to injury this week, as for the first time in the history of this poll, none of the 12 Big Ten teams appeared in the coaches' top 25. Our Eric Harold shows us how we got there with the week in highlights.
Thanks, Matt. Big Ten Game of the Week in the Leaders Division. Undefeated Ohio State against Nebraska. No score, first quarter, Taylor Martinez. Picked off by Bradley Roby. Takes it all the way to the end zone. 7 points, Ohio State. They strike first. Later, Ohio State up by 4. Second quarter, Braxton Miller runs right, completely untouched through the defense. Ohio State goes up by 2 scores. They would carry that lead all the way to the end of the game. 63-38, Ohio State takes out Nebraska. Another of the undefeateds in action, Northwestern against Penn State. Penn State looking to hand them their first loss of the year, and this would help. Third quarter, Matthew McGloin passes to Allen Robinson, his #1 target. Touchdown Penn State puts them ahead 17-14. Hold on, here comes Kane Coulter, their all-purpose quarterbacking wide receiving back. Touchdown Northwestern puts Northwestern in the lead. But here comes a familiar connection as Matthew McGloin hits Allen Robinson again in the back of the end zone. They pull within a score. They were down by 2. Here comes McGloin again, looking end zone. No Allen Robinson this time. He's going to take it to the house himself. Squeaks it into the corner of the end zone, puts Penn State up 31-28, and they would win this one 39-28. Northwestern loses for the first time this year. Going around the leaders division, Purdue gets trampled by Michigan's rushing attack. They give up 235 yards to quarterback Denard Robinson. Their offense struggled all game long, only 1 of 11 on third down conversions. They could not sustain drives. They fall to Michigan, 44-13. Also, Indiana had a productive day on offense. Cameron Kaufman, the quarterback, threw for 282 yards, 3 touchdowns. Shane Wynn had 12 receptions for 70 yards and a touchdown. That offense was not enough to overcome the Spartans. Michigan State wins 31-27 over Indiana. And now back to the Inside the Illini team in Savoy.
Let's take a look at what is going on, what has gone on in the Leaders Division as we move our way through the Big Ten race. Just 2 Leaders Division games, true division games this week. Wisconsin, talked about them earlier, they're at Purdue, take on the Boilermakers, and Ohio State is in Indiana. We'll talk more about that coming up, but kind of a key game there for Wisconsin at Purdue, Bob, you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, and Purdue laid an egg against Michigan. I don't quite know what happened there. Yeah, it's hard to call that one. I really don't know what'll happen. Wisconsin's kind of up and down. Purdue's had some good moments, some bad moments, but I like Wisconsin in this game.
Yeah, and Purdue just didn't play well at all. Denard Robinson, ran for 200, threw for 200. I think that's the third time he's done that in his career, so that's an amazing accomplishment. And, yeah, I think the Boilermakers have to kind of pick up the pieces. I think they will and play better against Wisconsin, but that surprised me. I think a lot of us thought that Purdue might pull the upset of Michigan, and if they could contain Denard Robinson, and obviously they didn't.
Ohio State sitting there at 2-0 in the league after that big win last week. They go to Bloomington, take on the Hoosiers. Last 19 games against Indiana, Ohio State is 18-0-1 since 1988. So who's favored in that ball game?
I like the Buckeyes. Matt pointed out that no Big Ten team is in the coaches poll. I'll just tell you right now, the coaches poll is wrong. Okay, they don't include Ohio State. The AP poll, which I participate in, has it right. The Buckeyes are certainly ranked high there. So that statistic about no Big Ten team in is kind of shady, because coaches poll won't acknowledge a team that's on NCAA probation. This had very little to do with these guys on campus now. So I think I consider Ohio State a ranked team.
Yeah, and it's apparent, Steve, that Indiana is a better football team. I mean, they dominated Michigan State for the first half of that game. They just didn't get much in the second half. I think they got 2 first downs and 37 yards in the second half, and that's how the game got away from them, as they just basically stalled out. That game turned on a dime, and then the Northwestern-Penn State game, which seemed to be in hand for Penn State in the Leaders Division, and just went right up in smoke.
Speaking of that, you mentioned Ohio State being on probation, Penn State as well. And we're kind of skimming over what could be the big story in the Big Ten, and that's the job that Bill O'Brien's doing at Penn State.
Absolutely. I think if you had a coach of the year vote mid-year, it's him in the Big Ten, and honestly, it might even be him nationally.
So Bill O'Brien doing the job at Penn State, Ohio State playing at Indiana, the Illini, of course, playing at Michigan. We'll talk more about that coming up, but that'll be a tough test to get on the road up there at the Big House.
Yeah, no question. And, it's funny, 2 years ago we had the game that was, 67-65, triple overtime. I don't know if we're going to see that again or we'll ever see that again, but certainly Denard Robinson, he's the guy that runs their offense. He's the guy you have to stop. You've got to find him. As Coach Beckman said during this week, you've got to know where he is at all times. Sometimes Illinois has been successful at that. Like last year, they did a pretty good job on him, still lost. The year before, they didn't.
Yeah. He is now the all-time leading rushing quarterback in the Big Ten, passing our friend Antoine Randall, who held that record for a long time. That's a look at the happenings in the Leaders Division. We'll go back to Matt.
Well, thanks a lot. Next up, we'll talk Legends Division, and I should clarify, Bob did mention it. Ohio State is actually 8th in the AP poll, just ineligible for that coaches poll. They've proved to be the best team in the Big Ten so far. More to come on Inside the Illini, Big Ten college football.
The Inside the Illini Play of the Week is sponsored by our local Anheuser-Busch distributor, Gagne Distributing. The top play from the previous week's Illinois game, and it has to go to Wisconsin running back James White. Down 7-0 in the final few minutes of the first half. A great play called by the Badgers, Joel Stavy, dropping it down to White, and White, so elusive on this play, hits the sideline and finds pay dirt. Fancy footwork and 62-yard finish. Good enough for our Play of the Week.
Welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football here at Buffalo Wild Wings in Savoy. Now, Northwestern and Nebraska were the two teams that came into the weekend ranked in that coaches poll we talked about in the last segment. They left the weekend out of all polls. Eric Harrell takes us back through the weekend highlights.
Thanks, Matt. Unbeaten Northwestern taking on Penn State, and the Wildcats would find themselves down 10 points in the second quarter. But Kane Coulter pitches to Benrick Mark, and he punches it into the end zone for the touchdown. Northwestern pulls within a score. More Benrick Mark on a punt return, looks right, runs left, gets a seam, makes a man miss, kicker can't make the stop, and Mark takes it all the way to the end zone. 7 points Northwestern. They take a 2-score lead, but Matt McGloin would put Northwestern down for good with this rushing touchdown. Penn State takes the lead 31-28, and they would win this one 39-28. Northwestern loses for the first time this year. Michigan playing Purdue, and this is all Purdue would see all game long. Denard Robinson running all over this defense. 235 yards on the day, including this one. Nice run right up the middle, through the front seven, into the secondary. It's going to get a little bit of blocking help. can't elude the last man. He gets him by the shoelace. Michigan rolls in this one. They win 44-13. Nebraska hosting Ohio State, hoping to hand the Buckeyes their first loss of the year. Taylor Martinez takes a snap up the middle of the field. Defense surrounding him, heads for the sideline, somehow keeps it in bounds. Touchdown Nebraska. They take the lead 24-21. They would be competitive in the first half, but Ohio State pulls away in the end. They win 63-38. Finally, Michigan State overcomes a 17-point deficit to defeat Indiana 31-27. Andrew Maxwell led the way with 290 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns, and Le'Veon Bell, their featured back, put up 121 yards on the ground with 2 touchdowns. And now back to the Inside the Illini team in Savoy.
All right, let's take a look at the Legends Division now. Look back at some of the action here as we get ready for the weekend as well. And one matchup that took place a couple of weeks ago was Minnesota and Iowa. And Iowa, I think, maybe surprised some people the way they played, and they won that game. And those two teams have important games this week coming up.
I think every team in the Legends Division, with the exception of probably Minnesota, can win that division. I think Iowa can win. I think Northwestern, Michigan State, Nebraska, Michigan. I think you could just throw them all up in the air and just pull one out. I really have no idea. I think a lot's going to depend on what happens in those crossover games. Nebraska just got clubbed in one. They got the short stick because they had to go to Columbus. They beat Wisconsin, so they're 1-1. See how they do in some of their critical games coming up, like against Northwestern next weekend.
Iowa goes to Michigan State. The Hawkeyes 1-0 in the league after that win a couple of weeks ago. They're coming off the bye week, so they should be refreshed. Michigan State 1-1. I think you got to go with the Spartans there. Yeah, and Michigan State, of course, struggled to beat Indiana in that ball game in Bloomington. Their quarterback's coming on a little bit, though, and I don't think he's been intercepted for a few weeks now, and they're at least catching the football for him, too, which certainly helped, and obviously they're a good running attack. So I kind of agree with Bob in the sense that the division, anybody could win it, and if Minnesota were to even get hot, and they're not that great a team, but they are improved, they're going to pose some problems for people as well, I think. I'll be interested to see how Northwestern comes back or bounces back after that game that it looked like they were going to win out there at Happy Valley. They led most of the game, and Penn State scored 22 points in the fourth quarter to come back to win that. How will they respond to their first loss? Yeah, it's a tough game because they were looking forward to this first 6-0 in 50 years, and it just didn't happen. Pat Fitzgerald has got those guys playing very well, but they're missing some pieces too. So I think you got to see how they do. I'm really curious about Michigan because they had such great expectations going into the year, kind of fell down. They picked it back up. They played great against Purdue. So we'll see how they do next week. And you think about it, Nebraska's had a couple of games in a row now where Nebraska was way behind, came back to beat Wisconsin at home. They were basically even with Ohio State on the road. How do they bounce back with their next game? And I think they're off this week. They need an off week. They need an off week. They need an off week. One of my friends during the Nebraska-Ohio State game texted me and said, "Are the Huskers drunk?" And I thought, well, that's probably not right. But I wondered if they actually brought their defensive guys to Columbus. They've played, and this is a coach, Bo Pelini, who values defense. I mean, he's a defensive guy, and they just did not play defense. It was one of the worst performances in the history of the program defensively, and I don't know how that happens. And people in Lincoln are probably ready to, storm the castle, actually. It's probably a little bit tougher on Bo Pelini since he was a defensive player at Ohio State. Yeah. So he was there taking all that in. Yeah, the black shirts that haven't been that good. Gray shirts. I think they've turned tan. They're not black anymore. That's right. All right, that's a look at the Legends Division, and let's go back to Matt for more. All right, thanks, guys. Coming up next, our latest look at Illinois grads playing in the NFL with our Noah Newman. That's next on Inside the Illini, Big Ten College Football.
The Inside the Illini Gem of the Week is brought to you by Ray Eldridge Jewelry, elegance without the attitude, in Peoria and Decatur. A shiny gem from Week 5 of the NFL season, and it's thanks to Danny Amendola of the St. Louis Rams. Not forgotten in the Rams' big win over Arizona, Amendola hauling in a 44-yard Sam Bradford pass with just one arm. That led to a score that set the tone for a solid 17-3 Rams win.
Hey folks, welcome back to Inside the Illini, Big Ten College Football. Alums who are in the NFL finally starting to get healthy as the weeks progress, including Pittsburgh's Rashard Mendenhall, his return, plus a few other key contributions from Illinois alums as we look look at our latest installment of Illini in the Pros.
Hey, good morning, Matt. I tell you what, a pair of former Illini teammates shined in the spotlight on Sunday night. If you recall, back in 2010, Martez Wilson and Corey Liuget were two of the top defensive players in the Big Ten. They led Illinois to a victory in the Texas Bowl, and at the time it was the program's first bowl win in over a decade. Well, Sunday night they squared off against each other as Liuget's Chargers took on Wilson's Saints. Liuget gave the Saints O-line fits all game long, but it was Wilson who had the play of the night with 15 seconds to go, sacking Phillip Rivers, forcing a fumble, and recovering it. A defensive trifecta to seal the victory as the Saints pick up their first win of the season. Big moment for Tez there. Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh on Sunday, former Illini Rashard Mendenhall returned from a knee injury, and he looked pretty good, running the ball 14 times for 81 yards, including this 13-yard touchdown in the second quarter. The Steelers are glad to have Mendenhall back, to say the least. Roethlisberger actually called him the team's savior. Yes, that's a direct quote from Roethlisberger. Well, Mendenhall's former teammate, Pierre Thomas, also had a nice game Sunday, racking up 70 total yards on only 9 carries and 2 receptions. And that's a look at this week's Illini in the Pros. We'll send it back to you guys in Savoy.
The Wilson boys, Martez and Tavon, again, with some big games. Martez, of course, with the Saints. He was a key factor late in their ball game. And Tavon Wilson got his first start and is playing very well.
Martez had the triple play. He got the sack, he got the strip, and he got the recovery to basically end the game against the Chargers. Another guy you got to talk about, Rashard Mendenhall, who, if you watch him make cuts, it looked like Rashard Mendenhall at Illinois. And guys coming off a knee injury, that's not always easy to come back from. He's critical for their team. If he's able to play like he played on Saturday, look out for the Steelers.
Yeah, it's good to see Corey Liuget, legit as we call him here. Liuget is now what he says. I know he got some props on national television, playing very well, of course, in that ball game as well, for San Diego. And it's just really fun to watch these guys. And it was good to see Jeff Cumberland catch a touchdown pass, a guy that he never really threw to him that much at Illinois. You knew he was a great athlete. He had the size, the hands, but certainly has emerged in the NFL as we thought he might.
And Tavon Wilson got his start. Played very, very well. Bill Belichick trusts you. That's a good thing. Jeff Cumberland's being trusted by Rex Ryan. That's a good thing. And the fact that they're throwing to him, you're right. It's a great deal. He's a guy who always had tremendous athletic ability. They just wanted to see it blossom, and they found it in the NFL. Sometimes it happens. I mean, guys that you don't think are as good as they can be, then go to the next level, and they turn into be superstars. Dave Deal, great example.
Speaking of Dave Deal, he's still out with that knee injury. He didn't play. I know the Giants would love to get him back at some point. He's been a mainstay on their offensive line for a long time. And A.J. Jenkins is yet to play with the 49ers. He's still on the inactive list. And we'll keep you updated on him and the rest of the guys as well. But right now, we'll go back to Matt.
Thanks, guys. Up next, our weekly trip to Charleston. Turnovers proving costly in Eastern Illinois' latest game, despite another pretty impressive offensive performance. We go inside the Panthers next on Inside the Illini, Big Ten College Football. Hey, welcome back. It's Eastern Illinois' homecoming today, and coming off their first OVC loss, they host a talented Jacksonville State team. We go inside the Panthers with Eastern Illinois University.
Coming off 2 wins at O'Brien Field, Eastern Illinois was in Martin, Tennessee last Saturday for their first road test in OVC play. UT Martin returned the opening kick for a touchdown, and EIU had their backs to the wall right off the bat, but responded with a 14-play drive for a touchdown. Cameron Barra missed the extra point, the second miscue on special teams in the first 4 minutes of the game. Turnovers also hurt the Panthers. The Skyhawks took advantage of 3 first-quarter turnovers by EIU and took a 21-6 lead into the second quarter. The second quarter would go better for EIU, putting together touchdown drives of 61 and 95 yards. EIU was within 21-19, and UT Martin returns the extra point attempt for 2. UT Martin scored another touchdown with 2 minutes remaining in the first half. EIU put together a 12-play drive that resulted in a crash at the goal line. Jimmy Garoppolo would walk away from the hit. UT Martin recovered the ball and took a 30-19 lead into the second half. The Skyhawks dominated the third quarter, outscoring EIU 14-3, and would go on to win 51-37.
Turnovers and special teams was the difference in the game, and you hate to lose a game like that because there's so much good, and then you don't have that good feeling that you won the game afterwards because the bad in the kicking game and the turnover department.
Coach Babers came up to us before a game. They have a real good special teams unit, and they said the difference of this game will be special teams, and it was. Offense, we moved the ball. Sometimes we couldn't score. Defense held their own, and special teams we hurt a little bit, but we'll bounce back.
In the loss, EIU put up more video game-like numbers: 38 first downs, over 600 yards of offense. Wide receiver Eric Laura continued his outstanding 2012 season with over 200 yards receiving for the second time this season. In the loss, Laura knows that the Panthers can play a lot better the next time they take the field.
This is a tough loss because we went 2-0 against OVC conference teams, and we really wanted to come out, go 3-0, and have a big week against Jacksonville State, coming in with a 3-0 record.
And later today, EIU hits the home turf at O'Brien Field. OVC rival Jacksonville State comes to Charleston. The Gamecocks and the Panthers are 2 of 5 teams currently at 2-1 in the OVC.
Key to getting to November is playing well in October. You gotta hold court in October, and you gotta keep your team focused. And last week, I think we lost our focus a little bit.
If we could go undefeated at home and pick up a couple road wins that we have left in the season, it's going to put us in a great spot as far as making the playoffs, winning the OVC, and that's something that this team hasn't done in 2 years. So that's something that's very important to us right now.
EIU and JSU are meeting for the 10th time overall. The Gamecocks have won the last 2 meetings against the Panthers. EIU has lost their last 2 times against JSU at O'Brien Field. EIU will look to go 4-0 at home this season. Panthers have scored 49 points or more in their first 3 games at home this season. Kickoff is set for 1:30 today in Charleston. Reporting on the Eastern Illinois Panthers for Inside the Illini, I'm Ryan Snodgrass of WEIU TV.
And as always, thanks to Eastern for that. Now, coming up next, we'll make our Healthy Choice Pick'ems. Plus, go to Facebook to answer your questions about Illini football. Somebody's going to win a $25 Buffalo Wild Wings gift card. That's next on Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football. Welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football. I've joined the table for our Healthy Choice Pick'em, brought to you by Physicians Choice Wellness. Give away your way today. Each week we'll be making our picks. $1,500 goes to a charity of our choice. Based on the standings, and let's take a look. Another perfect week for us. We have 3 of us at 5-1, Steve, Bob, and I. Brian at 3-3. All good picks so far. We talked about it a little bit before the show, though. We're not so sure that's going to continue this week, as we've picked some tougher games to pick, but some fun games to watch, certainly. And I'll start with mine. I go to a Western Athletic Conference matchup. Used to be my territory, so I've seen a lot of these teams. Utah State at San Jose State. I know San Jose State's favored by a couple of points in this one, and we've seen impressive performances from both of these teams. San Jose State opened up with a 3-point loss to Stanford at Stanford, and I think a lot of Big Ten fans probably know a little bit more about Utah State after seeing what they did against Wisconsin. And had Utah State had a healthy kicker who could have run out there and tried that chip shot to win the game, I think Wisconsin would have had their 3rd loss of the season. So an interesting game there. I think Utah State, I'm a little more impressed with what Gary Anderson has put together. I think they're going to go on the road, and I think it will be a mild upset. Utah State Aggies over San Jose State.
And speaking of Aggies, I've got some Aggies on my pick as well. I'm going with Texas A&M and Louisiana Tech. We saw Louisiana Tech up close and personal a few weeks ago. They beat Illinois and Virginia. I think while I'd like to see them win against Texas A&M, I think the Aggies might be a bit too strong for them. I really like their coach, Kevin Sumlin. So I think Texas A&M wins it, but I think it'll be a pretty good ballgame.
Well, my game is Stanford and Notre Dame in South Bend, and I can tell you that, obviously with Andrew Luck being gone, Stanford's trying to replace him. His replacement's been up and down, beat Southern Cal, didn't play so well against Washington, rallied Stanford from 2 touchdowns down to beat Arizona. Ty Montgomery had a big ball game receiving, but he may be sitting this game out. Stanford did win at Notre Dame a couple of years ago, but had lost 7 straight before that. But the stat for me that really stands out, Notre Dame rolled up a ton of yardage in their win over Miami this last week, 600 yards of offense nearly at Soldier Field. They've only allowed 3 touchdowns this year, 3 total touchdowns. And to me, that's just an amazing stat through the first parts of the game. So I'm going to pick Notre Dame at home over Stanford.
I've got Kansas State, Iowa State. To tell you how far these two programs have come, 25 years ago, I was the game between these two schools. I'm not making this up. There were 3,000 people in the stands. My girlfriend at the time walked into the stadium for free. They didn't even ask her for a ticket. Today, the place will be full. It'll be a crazy crowd. Iowa State's coming off of a huge win, but I think the Wildcats and the ancient but very successful coach, Bill Snyder, will get a win. The Wildcats, to me, they're that potential BCS buster. They're a team that are playing so well. They went and won at Oklahoma. I really like the way they're playing. Kansas State in a close game against Iowa State, which is also playing very well.
All right, well, if the trend continues and we go 4-0 again, Utah State, Texas A&M, Kansas State, and Notre Dame. It'll be interesting to see if our streak can continue. Next, we go to Facebook and take a look at your questions. And we dug up a little bit older one. Brandon Hembrow asked, and we'll elaborate on this question, would there be any possibility of an Illinois football matchup with Notre Dame? Now, my initial reaction is, well, Notre Dame is cutting ties with their matchups. They're not going to play Michigan anymore because they have to make room for that ACC schedule. Let's talk about that possibility a little bit, Steve.
Did the question say ever?
It didn't say ever.
I don't think it's going to happen for a while, even though it makes a lot of sense. You know, why not play that game in Chicago every year? But I don't think it's in the foreseeable future. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's been a while, and I think that, you know, it's almost like Notre Dame doesn't even know that there's a border to their west. I mean, they don't look. They play, you know, Michigan State, and Purdue, and obviously the Michigan series is stopping. I don't see it in the near future, but I think a game in Chicago. You saw the fans that were there. There's a lot of alums for Notre Dame. They get a lot of coverage in Chicago. Illinois gets a lot of coverage. I think it'd be a great game. I'd like to see it in both sports, for that matter, football and basketball.
Right. Here's the only scenario where it could happen. I think eventually the NCAA is going to go, hey, we need some more money. Let's play a 13th game each season. When they do that, that opens up some options for Notre Dame and for Illinois. But right now, I don't see it happening. I know Mike Thomas would love to play Notre Dame in Chicago. He'd play them right now every year till the end of time, but he just can't get it done because Notre Dame, like you said, they're cutting ties with Michigan. They're not going to play Michigan. They're not going to play Illinois.
Right. There's just not a whole lot of room on the schedule to add teams at this point. So, yeah, if the question had ever, maybe 30 years from now, who knows what happens. Okay. Well, next up, we'll talk Michigan. A big challenge for the Illini at the Big House. The keys to stopping Denard Robinson. And I want to figure this out amongst you guys. How much do we buy into the idea of a trap game for Michigan in this one? We'll discuss that next on Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football. Welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football, our final segment, as the Illini are in Ann Arbor getting ready for the second straight tough road game that they've had this football season. But like last week, their opponent isn't exactly where they'd like to be this year. Our O'Brien Auto Park of Urbana weekly preview looks at the Michigan Wolverines. This is one of those teams that you know what they're going to do. You just can't stop it. Just ask Purdue. The Boilermakers game plan to stop the run, and Denard Robinson ran for 235 yards in beating Purdue last week 44-13.
He's a unique athlete that probably comes once in a lifetime. You know, he's extremely fast, gifted.
Something's got to give. And what gave was Denard 235 and I think 25 carries.
That season-opening blowout loss to Alabama seems like a long time ago now. Since giving up 41 points to Bama, Michigan is back to the top third in the country in scoring defense.
Very aggressive, very active, as I say when I watch them.
And offensively, it all hinges around that quarterback. Despite having a qualified complementary piece in running back Fitzgerald Toussaint, Robinson leads the team in rushing yards by a long shot. He also leads in rushing touchdowns.
Fitz is a good running back. Vince is a good running back. Not too much of a surprise if they want to shut that down and make Denard do his thing, which he's proven time and time again.
We have to do a very good job with our keys and with our eyes to make sure that we're in the right place at the right times with him.
Now, the phrase many have used this week is trap game. Michigan gets Michigan State a week from today, a game that could decide the Legends Division Championship, not to mention it's an in-state game against a talented rival. So what's a game against a struggling team in the other division?
You can't pass any week on our schedule because every week we're playing for a Big Ten championship.
If you overlook any game in the Big Ten, you're gonna lose that game.
Now, glaring issues remain for the Illini on both sides of the football, the worst of which is the snowball effect. Coach Beckman hoping the Illini have the mental toughness to keep one big play from Robinson from becoming 5 big plays.
We have to respond in a positive manner instead of letting it kind of knock us down and not enable us to play up to the way we're capable of playing.
All right, guys, taking a look at the Wolverines, and I mentioned it in the piece there, and I talked about it a little bit before, the idea of a trap game, and I was just off camera here was talking about how I've read more previews about the Illinois-Michigan game that talk about Michigan State than they do the Illini. So, Steve, do you buy into that notion that this might be a trap game?
I think it is for the media.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure about the coaches. They'll tell you not. They'll tell you that we're only thinking about Illinois, but that's their big game, not their biggest, but certainly one of it's game big 1A for Michigan against Michigan State. Of course, the Ohio State game is probably the biggest, but as far as recruiting goes, maybe Michigan State is. You could make a case for either one of those. I think the coaches and players will tell you no. Maybe can you get them looking the other way? Maybe, but I don't think it's anything you can bank on.
No, I don't think so. And I think that, Michigan's offense is so predicated. That's been the talk all year, I think, in Ann Arbor is, are we relying too much on Denard Robinson? He does everything. And I was preparing my notes for the radio play-by-play broadcast, and I think Denard Robinson's like 3 paragraphs long on my note page, and just the little lines on everybody else because they've got Roundtree, they've got Toussaint, who rushed for 200 and some last year against Illinois, but it's obviously around Denard Robinson. And sometimes, again, Illinois did a good job against him last year, but it didn't help them because the tailback ran wild. And the defense, Illinois didn't do anything against the Michigan defense last year. I think that's the biggest story for Michigan in the last year or so under Brady Hoke, is their defense is just so much better. Under Rich Rod, they really struggle.
They do get geeked up about Michigan State, though, because they've had some struggles with them over the course of years. And remember times where Michigan State would knock Michigan out of the Big Ten title, and I know that game drives them nuts. Steve mentioned the recruiting aspect, and then their next game is against Nebraska in Lincoln. So they've got 2 critical games in the Legends division. So could they overlook Illinois? I don't know if overlook is the right word, but they might be thinking a little bit. And you got to remember what's going on campus. Guys are getting patted on the back. Hey, great job against Purdue. Hey, well, good job, beat Michigan State. They're not even talking about Illinois. They don't even know Illinois is coming to Michigan.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting dynamic to look at. And you mentioned a little bit about Denard Robinson. I know Purdue last week, and from what I read, they were really game planning to stop the run, and they did a good job containing Toussaint. But Denard, 235 rushing yards, became, like you mentioned, the all-time rushing quarterback in the Big Ten.
Yeah, Purdue tried that, didn't work so well. Illinois was effective, as Brian mentioned earlier, against Robinson last year. I go back to the game 2 years ago at the Big House when we were there. Part of my job on the radio network in the post game is to kind of recap the game. It just got over at 67-65. I mean, where do you start? I just started in overtime. That's when it got really exciting. But I hope we don't have another one like that.
Well, and the number of yards that he has compiled in Art Robinson, 10,000 almost in his career, which is just amazing when you think about it. And of course, rushing-wise, he passed Antoine Randall, as you mentioned, but and who was third on the list was Juice Williams.
Right.
Pretty interesting.
You must have made a very popular point there.
The crowd's going crazy.
That 67-65 game, yeah. I'll never forget Nathan Schillhouse coming off that field. He looked like somebody shot his puppy. And I've never felt so bad for a kid who played his brains out and just did everything he could. He just couldn't get that last pass off. What a great game. If Illinois plays like they did on that day, they'll have a chance today.
Yeah, I would think so. If you tell me the Illini are going to score 65, I would say, maybe the defense can handle that. You mentioned Schillhouse, a guy who we've talked to Coach Beckman about for the last few days, back to 100%. He can move a lot better now, opening up the playbook a little bit for Illinois.
I think so, but I still think he needs some help. I still think he needs those running backs to step it up a step to get near that 100-yard mark for one of them. That would certainly help.
Have to get better on offense. They just haven't, since the middle of last year, they just haven't simply scored enough points.
I think the running game's a big part of that.
Absolutely. Got to get those guys going. It's not necessarily their fault. They need some blocking. and the line sounds like it's in better shape now. So the more that comes together, the better off they're going to be.
All right, Illinois, Michigan, a 2:30 kickoff in Ann Arbor. We'll be watching the game. No show next week. The Illini get a bye. We get a bye as well. We'll be back on October 27th as Illinois gets ready for Indiana in the homecoming game. Thanks for watching Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football.
Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football is brought to you by your local Anheuser-Busch distributors. Ray Eldridge Jewelry, elegance without the attitude. Peoria and Decatur. Physician's Choice Wellness, give away your weight today. And Buffalo Wild Wings, Mattoon, Champaign, Savoy.